Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. As you know, this is a show about astrology, and I love talking about astrology because it's such a fascinating subject. I find it to be more accurate and relevant as time goes on, which makes sense because we've got more empirical data that's been gathering over the years, and so I'm just fascinated by it. It's always been a subject that's intrigued me, and I love talking about other people as well. Before we get my guest on, I want to remind you about my newsletter, which goes out every Sunday afternoon. In there, you'll find a couple of paragraphs of mundane astrology, and then I break it out into the individual sun signs for the remainder of the newsletter. And there's links there to my podcast, there's links there to my television show, and all the other things that you can look at. A lot of educational material on my new website, chrisflisher.com and turningofthewheel.com are my two websites. One and the same, actually, but you put either name in, it'll get you to the same spot. And so that's the important stuff I have to say about me. But let's get on to the subject of who is coming on. My guest is Aliza Einhorn, and she just finished a book called The Little Book of Saturn. Now, astrological gifts, challenges, and returns. And those of you who've listened to me before in the past know that I am, and we all have mixed feelings about Saturn because it's, some of us love it, some of us hate it, but it's the planet you love to hate, I guess. It's a good way of putting it. And I just want to welcome Aliza to the show today. So, Aliza, welcome to the show today. It's nice to have you on.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, there's this big sort of, I don't know if I want to call it a quarrel, but I would say there's this discussion in the astrological world about, is Saturn a benefic planet or a malefic planet? And I tend to think of it as a little bit of both. I think of Saturn as the kind of planet that we're thankful we have it, but we don't always like it. It's kind of like your mother telling you to clean your room up on Saturday morning while your friends are outside playing, and you don't want to be there, but you're doing it, and then once your room is clean, you go outside, you can feel relief. So there's kind of that, you do pay a little bit of a price, but there's a reward there. Don't you think Saturn gives us rewards at the end?
I totally agree. It's that eat your vegetables thing.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, if we don't get any fruits and vegetables, we'll get scurvy.
Right.
We'll get sick.
Yeah, exactly.
So whether we like it or not.
Yeah, and that's the lesson of Saturn. I think Saturn's there to prod us on and make us find our greater good and to do the right thing, right?
Totally. I mean, I'm not one of these yay Saturn people. I'm a Cancer, actually. Mm-hmm. I'm a triple Cancer.
Oh wow.
So Saturn and I are kind of
having a tough time today.
Lately. But without Saturn rules the bones, right? Mm-hmm. So without bones, we have no structure. We can't stand up. We'll just be limp and laying around in bed eating cookies and doing nothing, which is really the ideal Cancerian fantasy, right? So, someone like me, we need Saturn to push us and to make us achieve, help us achieve.
Right, you need that fire.
Something more than cookies.
Yeah, somebody it's sort of the good angel versus the bad angel, on your shoulders. You have maybe Saturn's the bad angel some days telling you got to do this to get things right, and then you kind of bounce back and forth with that. But it is a presence that I think is vital, and I think if we regard it as an optimistic, or not, I wouldn't go so far as to go optimistic. I'd say if we regard it as a sort of a savior in some ways, or someone who's forcing us to do the right thing, it can actually serve us quite well.
Yeah, without Saturn, I don't think we would do anything, really. We need that teacher.
Yeah. So your Little Book of Saturn, which is a great name, there really is nothing little about Saturn if you think about it, but the book is the book is little, which is nice, and it's a nice. I think it's a nice sort of it's a nice compendium of ideas and attributes that apply to Saturn through the signs, and of course then we have Saturn through the houses and all that, and it's an interesting parallel. I've got actually Saturn in Libra, and it's in my first house opposing my sun. So that in itself is challenging because I'm always trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, it is tough, I believe.
So you were born old. I think I might have said that in the book. I mean, I've never met a Saturn in the first house person that was not born with almost an unnatural maturity.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think circumstances.
Wise beyond your years.
Perhaps that's a complimentary view, but I'm not sure I am wise beyond my years. Although people might say I am. I've been very resilient and very responsible. I think what it does, it brings you to the sense of there's a certain sobriety, and I don't mean with regard to alcohol, but a certain sense of sobriety with regard to outlook on life and sort of how you approach life. There's always that sort of serious thing there, always sort of watching out for what's going to be happening and trying to be maybe perhaps overly vigilant in some ways. Does that make sense?
And with such a tough Saturn, you're not going to toot your own horn, You're not going to be like, hey, look at me. So of course you're going to say, no, I don't see myself in that elevated description of yours. You're going to be humble.
Right. And that humility is sometimes would be, it's the fact that it's there is maybe admirable as a human characteristic to be humble. We should all be humble, but I think it also removes some of the plaudits that you might get for some of the things that you've been through. If you have a difficult Saturn, you might accomplish quite a bit and sort of go unnoticed, which sort of in a way adds to the heaviness of it. Don't you think? Hello.
Wait, sorry, my phone.
Oh, your phone.
Had
Okay.
a glitch there for me.
That's okay.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I was saying what I had mentioned was that having a Saturn that allows you to be humble in that regard sort of has what it does is that it removes some of what you might receive in the way of admiration from others. Because you're humble, you keep quiet to yourself. People aren't aware of it. You really need a cheerleader out there to sort of say, "Look what this guy's doing," or "Look what this woman's doing." But we don't always have those opportunities.
Yeah, I think what just happened with us was a perfect example of that. Like me praising you and you saying, no, that's not me.
Yeah, right. Well,
which doesn't make it not true. Doesn't make my assessment not true. But you may not see it or feel you deserve it.
Well, it's interesting you mention it that way because I think that, oftentimes I perhaps may feel I deserve it, but I'm not willing to go look for it. I'm not looking for that. I'm not sort of trying to find that. I'm hoping it comes to it on its own. But that's part of the sort of it's like a weight that you carry. I always use the example of Saturn as, having a Saturn return in my book is kind of like trying to swim with shoes on. You're out in the water trying to swim and you're clunking along and you can swim, you can keep yourself afloat, but it's just a little bit harder with the Saturn there.
Yeah. I feel that way about all the Saturn transits. I mean, the hard ones. I mean, the Saturn return, of course, is famous for being this difficult crossroads. But there's so many.
I know. The squares are just as hard. Yeah, the squares are just and there's something in the Bible, I think, that 7 years of feast and 7 years of famine, which kind of tracks the transits of Saturn going around.
Yeah, it's brutal, actually. So when people talk about that benefic versus malefic thing, all you have to do is point to a transit. Point to, for example, Saturn going through your fourth house. Mm-hmm. All right, squaring your ascendant and other angles and squaring whatever else is going on. I mentioned that one because I just had that.
Yeah.
So,
and it was difficult with regard to home and family, correct?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Especially being a Cancer, that home is very important to you.
Yes, it is. And at the time, I was trying to consider Saturn in my decision because I had just moved to a new state that I had been in before, but a new state, a new city, and I was looking at places, where am I going to live? And I thought, you know what? Saturn's going to go through my fourth house. So I think I was trying to outsmart Saturn, which may not have been so smart in retrospect.
Right. I'm not sure you can.
But I agree with you. But that was really part of my thinking. I'm like, I'm an astrologer. This is, do I need to rent some, little bachelorette, something that's not going to test me? Or is it time for me to take responsibility? Mm-hmm. I mean, I wasn't looking to buy. I was looking to rent. And that was in my head. Oh, maybe I need a house because I need to learn. I need to be all Saturn about my housing, and it just kind of went on from there. Mm-hmm. And it's been challenging. And I probably should have rented the tiny bachelorette studio.
Well, you know what it would have done? It would have given you an opportunity to get a lay of the land of where you are. In other words, when you're going into a new town, new state, all the things you mentioned, the last thing you want to do is try to pick a house to live in because you don't know what the place is like. You want to get a feel for it. So it's almost maybe wiser to have rent for a year. And then when you discover the neighborhoods that you like, then you're able to do better. But I know those decisions come hard. I suspect you were probably trying to...
So I knew that much. What?
I suspect you were probably trying to do the right thing by getting a house, thinking this is where I should put my money because it's going to get equity and all that. And renting is not always fun.
It was all very Saturn. So I learned a lot. I've been learning a ton.
Yeah.
And I've been renting here too. But before, I didn't know what it was to be responsible, another Saturn keyword, really responsible for all the different parts of a house. So when the time comes, if the time comes that I actually, buy property, I know a lot more than I did 2.5 years ago.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's
how much work it is.
And that's the lessons of Saturn. I think that's where really you can say, "Wow, thank God I did the right thing there." And sometimes the hardest road at the time may seem, onerous or burdensome in some ways. You just don't want to go there, but that's sort of Saturn weighing down you. And I do think that there's a reward at the end. I have to say that.
Freedom.
Well,
I'll move again. That's the reward. Is I'm gonna get out.
Yeah,
I know what you mean. Though.
And moving is very difficult for Cancer. I think it's a very unnatural place because you do like the comfort, and the home is very pretty. I've got a moon in Cancer, so I understand it very well.
Oh, so and we'll tend to stay. We'll stay past the expiration. It's time to leave. It's time to leave. No. Oh, moon in Cancer, then you get it because I'm Sun, Mercury, Mars.
Oh yeah. Right. Yeah. So it's a.
What degree are you now?
I'm
I
at
want
6.
to know. Now
I'm at 6.
Oh, you're at 6. You're early. Wow.
Yeah, and it's conjunct my natal Uranus.
Oh.
I know. And I know. And they're both of them are opposing
I'm analyzing you in my head now.
I know. We can talk about that later. But I want to talk about the idea of how your Little Book of Saturn, I think, is a useful guide for people who are, if they know enough about astrology. I think people who don't know about astrology really do a lot. Of course, we all both probably share that opinion. If they knew what was happening in their lives and that it was going to pass. There are times, and especially with Saturn, it's a longer period of time. Yeah, it's 2.5 years, and it can be kind of tough during that time. But you do grow, and you
got to give people hope. You've got to give them hope.
I agree. And
when someone's under a Saturn transit, there's no light. It's so freaking dark. There's just this is never going to end. So as astrologers, we can say, look, it really is.
Right.
This isn't a Pluto transit. It's going to end a lot sooner.
Right. But it is also, when we say it's going to end, we have to say, well, is it going to end amicably or is it going to end in my favor? Where's the reward? So,
Maybe not.
I know. Well, I think that's part of it. I think that the Saturn 9 quality a person carries will allow them to be perhaps overly responsible in that regard and take on more, perhaps, weight than they should.
That's what I did.
That's
exactly what I did. I think we've got to balance it with Jupiter. We've got to balance it with Neptune. Be philosophical.
Yeah.
Dream and not just be that. Got to do the right thing. That's exactly the trap I fell into, thinking I was being philosophical, but really I was being,
pragmatic.
How can I be Saturn? Yeah.
Well, I mean, with such a strong placement in your own personal chart, you've got a strong, your association with Saturn is real and unavoidable. And it's one of those things that you've just got to bear. But I think the idea is that you want to come out of it as best you can. And I come back to the idea of the reward. When I say reward, I don't mean that you're going to hit the jackpot or something like that, but you're going to have a certain sense of satisfaction, knowing in your heart of hearts that you did the right thing. I think that's really what it comes down to. You think you sort of default to that, don't you?
And you learn skills. You learn something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you did the right thing, and now you've passed the test.
Yeah.
So it could be very practical. Like for me right now, I actually have more practical skills and practical knowledge about houses.
Yes.
Renting, buying what it would take. What it would require of me, physically, financially, spiritually, to take on this kind of burden, which, I didn't know any of this before as a former apartment dweller always.
Right. So you didn't have the
New Yorker apartment.
Yeah. So you didn't know what it was like to own a house and have to mow the lawn and get the oil filled.
I was just looking at the lawn just now, thinking, what a mess. Who's going to clean this up? Oh, I have to clean it up.
Oh yeah.
Or I got to hire someone, or I got to do it. And it's like, what?
Yeah, I know.
I'm used to it now, but it kind of like it can shock me. You know,
Right.
I can not see it for a month or so, and then oh,
Yeah, I
that
think Saturn is
grass is really
also
high.
I think Saturn is also the planet that sort of taps you on the shoulder in the middle of the night and gives you those panic attacks in a way of sort of like, where do I go? Because you
Yes.
find yourself being pushed and pushed and pushed, and there has to be a breaking point or some sort of resolution that, regardless, depending upon where that is in your chart, which house it's in, you're going to have to find some. You have to come to some sort of resolution. I think it forces that.
I agree. There's a lot of fear, especially with the transits. I mean, of course, there's the innate fear from whatever's happening in your natal, which I think we're used to it. You know, we don't really realize how afraid we are, or we don't really think about it. But then a transit comes, and it can. I mean, people who've never been anxious in their lives, if there are such people, but they can develop panic attacks. You know, up in the middle of the night, insomnia, freaking out all the time. I mean, Saturn can definitely push you to that place.
Right. I
That,
think
oh my God,
it does push you
I'm
there.
going to die place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have to be. And I think knowing astrology has helped me personally through those times. I do know they're going to end. I know that's going to happen. I know it's going to be a little bit of a struggle, and the outcome hopefully will be for my greater good as part of the lesson. And I think that we have to just admire that and appease Saturn in some way by seeing where he's pushing us. Where is this planet pushing us? Where is this planet asking us to grow and change in some capacity? And is it necessary to grow and change? If you're faced with a decision such as yourself, trying to decide where to live, whether to own or whether to rent, and how to manage that with a new city and town, those are all very Saturnian kinds of events for you, especially given that you're a Cancer and with all that strong Cancer energy.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Well,
and depending on house system, Saturn is still in my fourth or already in my fifth. I mean, we might not even want to go into that today, but that's another issue when you're looking at, where is my transit? Where is Saturn now?
Right. Well, that's
could
what I
be
usually
here, could be there.
That's usually what I do follow and see where the work is and what the work is required of me in order to make it right. It's kind of like I love the analogy of the growing up is part of it. That's obviously we always see that with the first Saturn return. You're 28 years old. Usually people get married, they have children, they get a house, they get a mortgage, they pay their student loans, thankfully, or hopefully they pay their student loans, and it becomes it's an awakener of maturity in some ways. It manifests maturity more. I think it's probably one of the best, most appropriate words for Saturn is being mature.
Yeah, and it keeps going. I mean, I find I'm not there yet at my second Saturn return, and the lessons will be different. But I think a lot of the themes will be the same. We're still going to be growing up.
We are. I think what happens, from my observation and having lived through that myself, is that the second Saturn return was more about, where I think the first Saturn return is more outward looking towards how do I get the house built, how do I have the kids, how do I get married. When it comes to the second Saturn return, a lot of those things have already passed, and it's more time to be self-reflective about what do I do to make myself more. Then you start looking more inwardly and saying, where's my next journey? Because, the kids are up and grown, presumably. I mean, I'm making generalizations here, but the kids are up and grown. Perhaps the house is paid. You're looking at getting ready to retire. What do you do in your retirement years? Those are all questions. So it becomes more inner directed as opposed to outwardly. I haven't gotten to the third one yet, but I imagine that
I was going to say, yeah. Even I think that must be spectacular. I mean, obviously, neither of us are at the third one, but if we do live that long, it's talk about an inner journey, inner situation.
Well, you have to sort of
wrestle.
You've got to wrestle. Yeah, you got to wrestle with the last chapters of the book of your life, so to speak. You've got to wrestle with how to reconcile that, and that can be extremely difficult too. I think it gives you, now when I mention that word sobriety, I don't mean, being an alcoholic. I mean just the idea of being sober.
Yeah.
Sober, this expression of, being sober as a judge, where there's a sense of seriousness and kind of a...
Clear-eyed.
Hopefully clear-eyed. And, being in that position allows you to have a sense of, I don't know, I don't want to say, I guess it's resolute. You're trying to be resolute and hold the bar and make sure you can keep everything, that's all the things that you're juggling can be kept in motion, and so you can keep the whole show going, really is what it comes down to. Do you find in your own experience that the we think of I think of Saturn as the father, and in some ways it's interesting because my father, with Saturn opposing Sun in my personal chart, that is
Oh
all
yeah,
about father. And
that's
in some,
daddy.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
about daddy. My father, believe it or not, here I am. I'm an astrologer. My father was a minister, so there was obviously a disconnect between the two of us. Although I use many of the same techniques, not techniques, but more of the same. I have the same philosophies about life and
Or
living and love as he did. They're just manifested through different vehicles. He'd use religion, I
right.
use astrology, and so they both.
It's more similar than different,
I think you're
probably,
right.
in a
Yeah,
lot of ways.
yes, it is. You're
Just
absolutely right.
different beliefs, different cosmology, but you're
Different
both spiritual
cosmology,
people.
but different cosmology for sure. But also the end result is kind of the same. So you're there to counsel and help people, which is what we do as astrologers.
Hmm.
Then that does serve the
Like
similar.
father, like son.
I guess, yeah, that's kind of, but it's an unusual sort of a twist on that, though. But let's talk about Saturn. Where do you want to talk about Saturn? What's the most relevant thing that you think about Saturn that it's worthy of us talking about? We know we can go through the signs and the plan and the houses. We pretty much know that as astrologers. But what is
Well,
it that what is it
let me
that
tell you.
brings your
My approach. Okay, because some people I find to me, I find some people get it wrong. Like someone who doesn't really know astrology that well, maybe they'll get their chart done or look it up online and they'll see, oh, my Saturn is in such and such sign, so I'm very that sign. But the way I look at it is that Saturn is going to limit it. It's going to limit those qualities. Or it may emphasize kind of the not so great ones. But to really to learn those lessons, to be everything your Saturn wants you to be, is going to take time. It's going to take years. It's going to take decades to become that sign and the house and the best of whatever Saturn is doing in your chart. So, when you're a kid or even in your 20s or 30s, you're not like, your Saturn is in Libra, right?
Right.
You're not going to be great at relationships. There's going to be pitfall after pitfall after pitfall, and it's going to take a long time to really get it right, and Saturn wants us to get it right. So that's what I want people to understand, that this idea of Saturn as limitation and obstacle and delay is what comes first.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
not, oh, my Saturn is in Libra, so I'm the master of relationships and harmony and love and art. It's like, no, not yet. Depends how old you are.
Right.
And some people might not even get there, which is very Saturnian of me. I can be a pessimist with all my Cancer planets. I can get a little dark. Even if someone lives to their third, Saturn return, they could still be a, word I can't say on the air.
right?
Immature or not treating people well, which is very anti-Saturn.
Yeah, yeah, and it is, and I think the point you made was about sort of this when the squares come along or the trans oppositions and conjunctions, you tend to get these things get triggered, and you can see them coming. You say, okay, I'm headed into a time when this is going to be torn apart and examined. And
Exactly.
the repeated process of that is just like any sort of climbing of any ladder, if metaphorical or however you want to look at it. You're climbing a ladder to get someplace, and the squares obviously are like climbing stairs because you got that 90-degree angle, up, 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 up. And those stairs are climbing so that you achieve your greater purpose or higher good or achieve something of lessons are learned. And their lessons are probably only learned the hard way. And that's what you've got to really cling to, because it does. Especially if you learn the lesson, you learn the lesson, you can remember the lesson, you're not going to make the mistake again, then Saturn can be incredibly useful because you've learned that lesson, you won't make that mistake again. And it can be very valuable in that regard.
And sometimes we get them over and over and over.
Yes, exactly. And
and
that,
then finally we're on the floor like, I get it, okay, Saturn. And then the transit's over. It can be very dramatic like that.
Oh, I totally get that. Yeah, I think it's really really powerful, and it shows that there's I think that there's a driving force behind it too, which I think is, ultimately is driven by we think of Mars as being ambitious and being the ambition, the action figure, whereas Saturn in some ways has us being equally ambitious, but maybe perhaps from a different motive. We're doing it out of responsibility as opposed to just perhaps gratification with Mars.
Yeah, I don't think it's it's funny. It's not purely for the glory. It's not the I'm trying to parse that in my head. Now you've got me thinking about Mars versus Saturn, thinking about like the heat and the passion of Mars versus like this calm, cool, and collected Saturn, and yet they're both climbing the mountain. They're both climbing the ladder. Okay, one of them is really impatient. That's going to be Mars. Right. Mars is like, I got to reach it. I want it now. I'm going to get it. Give it to me. Here I go.
Action-based, yeah.
Yeah, and then Saturn is, I'm going to take my damn time. Watch me. Mm-hmm. I think Saturn's going to achieve more. Saturn's always going to achieve more because Mars is going to get tired.
Yeah, it will. Mars will burn out faster, and it wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have the same impact. But I think having Mars and having Saturn and Libra in my first, as a child, I felt very much constrained. Perhaps that may have been because of my father. I don't know. Living under the guise of a ministry is kind of awkward in a way because there's this guy on the altar preaching and all this stuff as a kid.
So many rules.
Yeah.
How many rules did you have of right and wrong or what to think?
Well, he wasn't. He was a very open-minded religious person. So he was not. He was a Protestant. He was a Episcopalian, but he was what's low church, meaning that he was not tied to all these sort of pomp and circumstance of the higher churches. Right. So he had a very liberal mind, and he was a very
less incense.
Yeah, less incense, right. He had a very kind heart and very understanding. There weren't so much rules as it was. I felt some of these rules being imposed on me, not by him per se, but by society, by virtue of the fact that they looked at me as if I had to be a reflection of him, which put undue pressure on me to be good, which, of course, I did just the opposite. And because there was a sense of rebellion.
And what did he say about that?
He actually understood it and defended me in many cases. In times when I thought he would be, we never came to fisticuffs or arguments about this stuff. He was always very philosophic and I guess he ultimately had faith in me in some way. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't recall where his Saturn was in his chart, but he was a Pisces, which is great for a minister. So he had a very open heart.
Yeah.
And was able to sort of forgive as he should have. That's the Christian doctrine, is to forgive, and so he was able to forgive some of my wild rambunctiousness and still cared for me. So there weren't rules so much as I would say as there were sort of self-imposed sense of restriction. I think that's what Saturn brought about with me.
Okay.
Yeah.
I grew up in a religious home, and my father was not a rabbi, but at least I don't think he was. He went through like the ultimate training where you have, because that's just a degree basically.
Yeah, you're right.
I don't think he finished it, but especially later in life, he did the religious services in different places.
Oh, so then
and
there
were a lot of rules.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was definitely. If he maybe didn't graduate, but if he was in the active role, then he was essentially being that person.
He was totally in the role, and there were lots of rules and
so
lots.
So did you face a lot of rules?
From that, early on. Things changed. My parents divorced, so the divorce brought different rules.
Yeah.
But in my earliest years, when we were the most religious and the family was together,
Yeah, there are rules.
Yeah. And because of that, I'm actually very comfortable with rules.
Oh, I am too.
I like a certain amount of rule or restriction is comforting. And I do have a Saturn Moon trine in my chart.
Well, I think the rules are good. I think that's why people flock to the military service and to perhaps, fundamental religious churches. Yeah, because you're just told what to do. You can act like a blind sheep and just follow the rules.
Exactly. Back to the bones. We need the bones to stand up. We need the rules to live.
Absolutely. It's very accurate in that.
Because without the rules, what the hell do you do each day? I don't know. Well, I have a schedule. I have a job to go to. I have a prayer to pray.
Yeah, you got to be self-ruled, I guess, if you haven't got rules. And not everybody can be self-ruled, which is unless you've got a strong Saturn, then you can't be self-ruled.
which I do, I guess, because I've been self-employed for so long now.
Yeah.
And people say to me, well, how do you do that? How do you?
I know, and there is some comfort in being employed by somebody else because you don't have to worry about some things. You just have to. It's much harder as an entrepreneur to try to keep yourself afloat. So we are
Yeah.
talking today with Aliza Einhorn, and her website is Moon Pluto Astrology, all three words strung together.com, moonplutoastrology.com. And we're talking about her book, which she just released, called The Little Book of Saturn, Astrological Gifts, Challenges, and Returns. And we're going to come back in about a few minutes and talk some more about this topic. And so hang in there. Again, her website is Moon Pluto Astrology, one long string of words all together, moonplutoastrology.com, Aliza Einhorn. And we'll be right back in a few minutes, so hang in there.
What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today, or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
Hi, your host, Chris Flisher here. I've been producer and host of this podcast and radio show for the past 10 years. My goal has always been to provide enlightening, progressive, and logical discussions about where we are as a species and how we move ourselves further down the road towards our greater potential. I believe astrology provides a great tool for observing our progress and awakening our consciousness to becoming a whole, better, and more complete individuals. I have sought to invite the best contemporary guests, thought leaders, and progressive minds to discuss topics that concern us all, regardless of your beliefs. Consider making a contribution through PayPal to help keep the great wheel turning so that I can continue for the next 10 years along the same enlightened path. As always, I thank you for your support.
Okay, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. My guest today is Aliza Einhorn. She's the author of The Little Book of Saturn, and her website is Moon Pluto Astrology, three words strung together, moonplutoastrology.com. And we're talking about Saturn. Now, I am very well acquainted with Saturn, having had it in my first house all my life, directly opposing my sun, and I've got it squared by a number of planets everywhere else. So it has been a challenge for me, especially every 7 years. I sort of find myself in this quandary of the squares or the oppositions or the conjunctions. And I find that the squares are always difficult for me in particular because they do force me to do something that I don't want to do. I can't sit back any longer.
Right.
And so
Something
the analogy,
uncomfortable.
yeah, the analogy I use is that if the roof did not leak, we would not fix it, and Saturn makes the roof leak. I also say that about Pluto, too, because Pluto, I think, makes our roofs leak as well, and we can't just sit there with the roof leaking. We have to get up. We can't sit in the sofa and watch TV all day if the roof is leaking. So we got to get up. We got to fix it. So it's that great forcing agent in some regards, and I'm wondering how you view that. Does that ring a bell for you?
It's so funny that you mentioned that because while I've been in this house, what do we have?
A leaky
roof leak.
Oh, there you go.
Among other things. But that's completely it. The transits happen and they compel us.
Mm-hmm.
And it depends on the nature of the transit and what planets it's touching. You know, what is it doing?
Right. And
That's
I think this
what's
is
going to create the direction.
Yeah, and there's a sense of urgency, I think, sometimes because Saturn, you can't procrastinate.
Urgency plus straitjacket.
Yeah,
you know,
you
like
can't-
you try and you can't move.
Right. That is
That's
very
what I
much the
find
case.
with the squares.
Yeah. And so what sort of advice do you give to someone like that? I mean, I know what I would say. I would say you've got to muscle through it. You've got to
You know, the first thing, someone just asked me that, like in general, about hard transits, which I love that she asked me that because this is something that I've written a lot about. In fact, this might be like the thing that I've blogged about the most for as long as I've been doing this is, what do you do? Because life is so hard. What do you do? What do you do? So I told this person the other day, the first thing you have to do is know your chart. You have to learn your chart. Right. You have to know how you respond to stress, for example, which you can easily see in your natal. You need to know what the planets mean.
Right.
Like even before any other kind of advice, educate yourself. Know how your chart works. Yeah, and know how the planets work. Because if like someone listening to this, they're definitely going to learn about Saturn.
Right.
But they might not know anything about Neptune or Uranus. So the more you understand the planets and how they operate, that's step one.
Right.
And then knowing yourself, and then that's step two.
Yeah.
And then with Saturn in particular, you can't avoid it. I mean, you do have to just hunker down and face it, muscle through, as you said.
Yeah, it's you really have to. You have to power down. It's really the only thing you can do, or power through rather.
And the learning is the balm for the soul. Like knowing. I mean, not just knowing that a transit is going to end, but I find the more knowledge and the more self-inquiry and the more people that I can talk to. I mean, especially when I was learning, because I was learning in a class. I was learning with other people. You know, like the more we can share our experiences, the more community we have to go, oh, man, I am under a Saturn transit. You know, we got to talk about these things.
No, I think it's very valuable.
Understand.
I think it's very valuable because I think what it does for you is it allows you to, I mean, vocalizing is the only way. I was listening to a podcast earlier today about, men who had lost their wives and the grief, and they came together in a sort of a support group mechanism. And many of the men, acknowledged the fact that they were not support group guys, which is not uncommon for men to say. But because of that process and going through that hard process and having the conversations, they were able to air things. And maybe perhaps thoughts came up that they wouldn't ordinarily have thought of had they not been in a conversation with other people. Because conversations take on a life of their own. They have a give and take, and they're spontaneous. And one person may say something that triggers a thought in you, and then you respond back that triggers a thought in them. And they have this sort of ping-pong back and forth exchange, which can be very fruitful. And I think that what you're saying is wise, is to be able to talk about it. But you've got to be able to talk to somebody who understands astrology. You can't just walk up to somebody in the street and say,
that's true, because they're going to look at you like you're nuts.
Yeah, you can't. Even a friend,
you need someone who's sympathetic,
right?
Sure.
Who understands the weight.
Understand
what that's like. And I do think Saturn is weighty in that regard. It's kind of like a.
Oh yeah.
Like I
say,
the
weight of the world.
Swimming with shoes on, or walking around with a backpack full of bricks all day long. You just got this weight on you. You can't seem to shake it. And it's wise.
And it's real.
It's real.
It's important to validate people that it's real. It's not in their heads. And you can't go around saying that to people who don't know anything about astrology, for sure.
No, but you can say, I'm going through a very difficult time now. You can't rationalize it by saying I'm going through a Saturn return, but you can say I'm going through a very difficult time right now. I've got to make a very difficult decision. The window is closing. I can see it. I've got to respond here.
I can't breathe.
I've got to respond.
Air.
Yeah, exactly. I've got to respond. And how do you respond in that? You're dash around looking for help. And, it may be that what the decision at the end, it may not be what you want it to be, but it may be what's right for you, or you may try to find a way around that. But I don't think you can run, but you can't hide from Saturn. You can't procrastinate from Saturn either, I don't think.
Yeah, you can't. Saturn's reality. It's a cosmic reality check.
It is. And you may put off a decision, people may put off decision.
And it's going to come back.
It's going to come back. And that's probably...
I often say to people that Pluto is not Venus. Same thing with Saturn. Saturn is not Venus. They're two different energies. This isn't like love and light here.
No way.
Hard work.
No, this is hard work, but that's how it's part of the balance of what we come up with in our lives. That we are a composite of multitude attributes, and I think that we all have assets, we all have liabilities, and somewhere in the mix there is our ability to cobble together a sort of sense of stability and try to move forward. I do like the stability piece of Saturn. It is something that's very stable and dependable in that regard, depending, if you find someone who has a strong, say, a Saturn in a second house, perhaps they're very good with money, very responsible, oftentimes you
and might not have too much.
Might not have too much, exactly. Or Saturn...
that's...
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just thinking, like, that's a transit. When that happens by transit, some people get really scared. And I like to remind them that with Saturn, you can build and you can commit to something. So like, let's say someone listening now is under that now, Capricorn is their second house, but that's not necessarily a loss, and it's not necessarily scarcity. It can build on something from before. Also, something I've noticed too, that what you learn, now listen to this, all right? Because I believe this to be true. What you learn while Saturn is in your 12th, you can make money from when Saturn is in your second. And then the linking house, the first, is the manifestation process.
Right.
Then once it gets to your second, you're ready.
You may see things come to fruition. So in many ways, if you're going through say Saturn is in your 4th, for example, and you're trying to decide what to do about where you're living or your family, your family is weighing on you heavily. It may, like you say, you could do two things. I think you could either opt for a different option and perhaps move and collapse that whole thing, or it could force you to rise up and find the solution that's there. And even though it's hard to find that solution and it requires sacrifice and hard work on your part, you may come to an amicable solution at the end, which thereby brings you back to the idea of a reward. The hard work that you do allows you to have that reward. So I use the analogy of the mother cleaning your bedroom on a Saturday morning when you're 7 years old and your friends are all outside playing and you want to go, and your mother's saying, no, clean that room first. So you go inside to clean the room, doing your Saturnian thing, and you get to go outside with your friends in the afternoon and all's well. It's a small little vignette of what the Saturn transit is like, because there is that hardship there. But I do think that at the end, you find yourself somewhat, I don't want to say self-satisfied, because that sounds a little bit, cheeky or whatever. But you do come away saying, okay, I did it. I got through it, and I solved this problem. There's a sense of satisfaction at the end.
And you have a clean room.
And you have a clean room, and your mother's not on your back anymore.
With Saturn being reality, this is something you can touch.
Yeah.
It's right there. The room is cleaner.
You find ways around. So, you might find a person who's faced with a situation like that. They may find that their money resources are tight, so they take the steps to cut their budgets. Maybe they can't grow by earning, so they grow by cutting. They cut maybe the cable bill. Maybe they don't get their lawn mowed every week or every other week. Or, you know what I'm saying, they don't go out to eat as much. They find ways of trimming, tightening your belt, so to speak. Is a very Saturnian kind of attribute as well, I think.
And Saturn can do good things to us, too. I mean, we have the trines, we have the sextiles. And what I've noticed about that is that they're subtle, talking about the transits here. Whereas a hard transit there's no mistaking it. I hope I'm not scaring people. But,
No,
there really is it's reality.
Yeah.
There really is no mistaking a hard Saturn transit. It can be really hard. But then the good ones, it's best not to approach the good ones like you might approach, potentially a good Jupiter transit or even a bad Jupiter transit. It's going to be subtle, but stabilizing.
Stabilizing and subtle.
You might be thinking, oh, well, Saturn's trining my whatever. Where's my, where is it? You might not be able to find it.
And it also,
but it's there.
It's good for, I think, people who hit that point and they have a square to Saturn, and you're supposing I remember I had Saturn in my 3rd when I was going to college, and it was perfect because I had to do the work to get through college, and the reward came at the end of it. And it was pure astrology. The classic textbook astrology. Saturn in the 3rd house, opposing my 9th house. It was perfect time to be back in school to get that done.
Right.
Obviously, there's work involved. Obviously, the results are there. But when you graduate, you walk out, there's that reward. Again, there's always that reward. If you put the hard work in, I think the reward comes out.
Later.
Yeah, later.
After it's all done.
Well,
here's an example from my own life. My natal Saturn is in my 9th house. Okay, publishing, and I was always a writer. Like how sometimes tarot readers will say, "Oh, I was drawing cards when I was in the womb." I was doing tarot when I was 2, like that kind of stuff. Well, that wasn't me. I came to that. I came really to anything occult later, but I was always a writer, always. And I got an MFA, and I thought, okay, I'm a poet. I'm going to have a book. I'm going to have my book of poems. I'm going to be teaching in the university. And like all those dreams of publishing, 9th house where my Saturn is, they didn't happen. Okay. They didn't happen until now. And it's not a poetry book. It's an astrology book. But this is decades later. This is classic, obvious astrology that it did take me 30 years, if not more, to have my first book published.
Interesting. That
Now,
that
if I
30
didn't
years,
have-
would be a Saturn
Yeah.
time period. Yeah. Hmm.
If I didn't have Saturn in the ninth, maybe it would have happened sooner. I don't know.
Yeah. But we can see this.
But that is an argument for the delay.
That certainly is, and it certainly is the hard lessons. But doesn't it feel that much more like, the harder the battle, the sweeter the victory, right?
Honestly, no. I wish it had happened sooner. I mean, I'm honest. I wish because I got my graduate degree by the time I was 25.
Okay.
For some reason, I thought it was going to be a straight line, and I thought, oh yeah, I'm going to have this volume of poetry out, and I'm going to do this and this, and I wish that's how it would have been.
Right.
So I don't so much, feel like, I mean, I love that it's happening, but
now. But you sort of wish it would have happened sooner. You would have been further along. Perhaps.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But I think
I
that's
have a pretty strong Mars in my chart. I'm a little impatient.
Yeah, I have the same problem. But I think that waiting. I don't want. I mean, it does. I don't know. I mean,
That's so much more to teach now.
Yeah, events. Of course, you got more mileage. You've got more experience.
Yeah,
when
I taught when I was 24. I mean, I was teaching when I was 24, 25. What did I know? I don't think I knew very much. Now I know. Now I have all this insane amount of life experience that I teach, which is also ninth house.
Right. Which brings that whole conversation to the present, where you have, it may have been. I know what you're saying about impatience. You can't be impatient you can't be impatient with Saturn. You just got to ride it out.
No.
And it does force you to step up and look at other options. I think it makes you very inquisitive. It certainly turns the heat up on the fire. Let's put it that way. That's underneath
Yes,
you.
It does.
And you have to find a way.
You want things to happen. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And but you want to be careful. If you don't want to become obsessive, because you can get overly worrisome about that, and you just got to. There's a happy medium between buckling and rising to the occasion, buckling under the occasion and rising to the occasion. And I think that you have to have
that is hard, not to get crushed by the fear, the fear, the anxiety from a hard transit.
Well, that's where the conversation has to come.
That is the challenge,
The conversation has to come from you saying, I'm not going to let this get me down. And then your personal natal Saturn will rise to the occasion, hopefully, and muscle you through that, saying, yep, you can do this. You've been in worse places than this. Then you can get through this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you might
get advice.
Yes, you might get tired of having
Saturn.
to do it over and over again, but that's just life, old boy. As I always say to myself.
Yeah, when you're on the floor, because Saturn has knocked you down, then you've got to lift up your hands. You've got to ask someone to help. You've got to ask a Saturn person, someone older and wiser who's been there before, who can help you get back up, even if you can't do anything, but at least to stand up. Mm-hmm. That's part of it too, asking for help from Saturn.
I know.
Like you said, your natal chart, and then actual human beings or your helping spirits.
Well, I think you have to make friends with your natal Saturn and sort of accept where it is and just say, this is who I am. And it's part of
It's going to show your purpose.
Yeah, it will show your purpose. And there may be a sense of, I think of Saturn as being very dependable. When I look at people's charts and I see where their Saturn is, I think, wow, you can be counted on to get this done. You can be accountable to get things done. And my personal Saturn has been incredibly helpful to me through times of great, enormous personal strife and trauma that I had to live through. But had I not had that strong Saturn, I don't think I could have done it. Or, well, perhaps I could have. That's part of the whole human condition. We're faced with this situation. We end up in life in a certain place. We have these planets. We have these aspects, and life gives you the experiences that sort of match that, and yet ultimately you are equipped because you have those internal tools.
It kept you rooted in reality.
Yeah, well, it certainly did that. There's no question about it. And I think that anyone would find that to be the case wherever it may be. Someone with a Saturn in the 7th house, you might say, well, that's not a very it's sort of a loveless kind of position to be in, because Saturn is your responsibility, and Saturn is the 7th house is your relationships and your close friends. And you may find that you have to put more work into them, or that you're a little more sober about how you deal with relationships, or you're not quite the bon vivant that you might like to be or see yourself as if with the 7th house. And I just picked the 7th house out of the blue because I figured people could relate to that because it has to do with their relationships.
And longevity. You know, I'll see people with that in their chart. I can see people who have never had a serious relationship, but then I'll also see folks who have been in a relationship forever.
And they're extremely
longevity,
dedicated.
commitment.
Yeah, commitment.
Yeah,
They're
totally. And
dedicated.
they take relationships seriously. But I've also seen the absence of it with Saturn in the 7th or in the 8th.
Yes, I agree with you. And
can go either way.
There's always that duality in astrology, which is one of the fascinating things. It's how best we can best we can make that work. But I think ultimately it's that responsibility of, and as you mentioned, I know one of my clients has got a Saturn in the 7th, and she's always been very dedicated to the relationship and is there, doggedly loyal and doggedly there for the other person, regardless of how bumpy the road may get. So very dependable in that regard, someone you can really count on.
They're not going to run, they're not going to be Uranus, right?
Right.
See ya.
Yeah, no,
I'm out the door.
Right. They're willing to go through the hard work in order to get to the reward at the other end. And there is ultimately reward because, sometimes the reward in the Saturn in the 7th is the...
So that's good advice.
Yeah.
For people who are listening to this who want love advice, because we always want love advice no matter what.
Yeah.
You need someone with a good Saturn, who's not going to run when things get difficult.
Right. And I think the reward in that is that the person with the Saturn in the 7th will feel satisfied by the accumulation of time and memories and energy that goes into that long-term relationship. There will be something about that gives them pleasure. I think that's the reward that Saturn brings, because the loyalty and the resoluteness to stay together.
I like the way you put that. I like the way you put that because you're linking it with feelings. Like that's going to make Saturn, because I'm all about the feelings with my Cancer planets, but that's going to make Saturn feel good.
Yes.
That the accumulation of the years, and I've been so dedicated.
That's a sense of accomplishment. I mean, relationships are a job of sorts. For
yes,
air quotes around the job, but they do require work, and they require our attention. They require our intention to get through them properly with the right set of ideals and expectations all the way around. I think that the reward comes from that, the ability to say. And I speak of feelings because I've got Moon in Cancer, so of course I'm going to speak to feelings. But that I think is the reward. That reward in itself is something that they can congratulate themselves on. They take great pride in being able to stay with someone for a long time. This person I was talking about ended up getting a divorce after 32 years, and it devastated her because she said, I shouldn't have to deal with this. I've been a very good person.
And because who are they now? Where their identity is,
Identity is very critical in a relationship because, I think of the relationships as sort of a, I always use the example of a composite, sort of, we have, there's a man, a female, or a male and a male, or a female and a female. I'm not trying to be gender specific. I'm just going to stick with the old ways. But you have two people enter into a relationship. The relationship becomes a third entity in that whole array of qualities because you got one person. I agree. Who's got their own personality. You got another person who's got their own personality. When they come together, they sort of become a merger of two. And hopefully it works that way. And they're probably different with themselves than they are when they're with that person because they are reflective. There's a sort of mirroring effect when you're into relationships. That the relationship takes on a whole new personality into itself.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree with that. It is. It's a third soul.
It's a third
that gets
soul.
Created.
Yeah, you sort of create and that has a personality unto itself, which is why synastry and composite charts are so interesting to look at because you can really see those dynamics that are there. So in your wise age, as you have gone through written this book about Saturn, how do you feel about Saturn? What's your gut about Saturn? What's your how do you feel about it?
Gut about Saturn. We need Saturn. We absolutely need it through the hard times, through the rewards. I mean, Saturn is unavoidable. We all have them somewhere. The transits are going to come, but overall, we need the lessons. It reminds me of a line from Annie Hall. We need the eggs.
Yeah.
It's difficult, but we need it. We need it. I mean, otherwise what? Mm-hmm. Back to the image from when we first started talking, otherwise we're sitting in bed eating cookies. Like my Cancer, Sun, Mercury, Mars would be perfectly fine to do. Mm-hmm. But Saturn comes in and says, get up. We got work to do.
Get out the door, yeah. It's like the alarm clock. Saturn is the alarm clock in our lives. We don't want to hear on Monday morning.
Oh my gosh, I got to tell you, my alarm clock is this song from the band, and the song is The Wait.
Oh, yeah.
I even have a Saturnian alarm clock.
Yeah,
I knew I was going to talk to you, this morning, so I set my alarm so I can, get my coffee and wake up. And what is it? It's the wait. And here we are talking about the weightiness. It does keep us grounded and on the earth, Saturn.
But what's hard to do is to take the weight off. Take the weight off.
Yeah, and to fly. So then we have the other planets, right? To just kind of give us a moment to breathe. Thank God. So it's
I've had moments in my life where literally I woke up and I could tell that there was a new weight on me that had not been there before. I'm not sure why it arrived or what it was pointing to. I'd look at my chart and sure enough there would be this incredibly right, spot on by degree kind of transit. So I think some people are more their relationship with astrology is more sensitive. Yeah, their relationship to astrology is more visceral. Almost some people can be tracked almost exactly to the point of the degree where things are happening.
Yeah. I'm that way too. That way too. And I've always had those people around me. Like my clients or my students were all very obsessive like that, analyzing it and what transit is this? I feel such and such. What's going on? Let's look. Let's explore it. We can always find the answer,
Right, yeah.
It's always pretty obvious, actually.
And you may not like the answer, but it does give you a sense of, you do see that this is, part of your duty, and so you do it, right? And you just get through it. Mm-hmm. You really have no choice. That's the sort of the beauty of it all. I mean, through any life, through any sort of, especially creative pursuit, there's a very strong Saturnian thing there. If your goal is to be a published poet, that is going to weigh on you. Now, you say your first book came out in astrology. I bet you've got a book of poetry that's got to be put out somewhere, and that's going to come along and get you sometime.
You might be psychic. Because even before this book, before I met my editor, before any of this was happening, years ago, meaning maybe like 4, 5, 6 years ago, I met someone online who runs her own poetry press. And I had forgotten about poems. I was done with that. I'm an astrologer. The only writing I do now is astrology writing and blogging. But she kind of inspired me and got me back in. And she's a Taurus, so things move slow.
Right.
So oddly enough, the astrology book, which actually comes out tomorrow, is coming first. But I'm sure I'll publish with her press eventually. It just we made the agreement. So there's another Saturn thing.
In some ways, you're
right. That's supposed to be.
Yeah, in some ways, you've crossed that hurdle already because you've crossed the hurdle of getting a book out, which is critical. That sort of says, okay, you can now call yourself an author and a published author. Which gives you
That's true. I had never thought of it before. Yeah.
Now that gives you a sort of the courage, or at least the wherewithal, to say I can do this again, and Saturn will drive me onward. And I have published a book myself. I self-published it, but I published a book myself, and I know that I want to publish again in the real world through a real sort of press, whatever you want to call it. And I think that the process of doing that will be cathartic and very Saturnian. In its respect.
It is very Saturnian. My editor and I we joked about that. She said, "Aliza, I'm your Saturn. If you had chosen a different planet, because the process was hard." She said maybe it wouldn't have been so hard. Mm-hmm. If you had written about Neptune, it might have been a little easier. But it was very hard.
Yeah.
But because you're responsible to other people, not just to the work. But
right.
I mean, deadlines are very Saturn, but deadlines were no problem. It was more, okay, here's what you need to change. Here's what you need to fix. You can't, and these weren't her words, but you can't be a sentimental Cancer here. You've got a job to do, change this.
Right.
Not, she wasn't putting, words on the page for me, but she was saying, all of this here is just not working. Mm-hmm. So this is the direction it's got to go in. That was pure Saturn.
Go back and do it again. Maybe that was probably a Saturn.
And
Saturn
she's a
retrograde.
Cancer too.
Saturn retrograde.
Yeah. I was writing this book through difficult Saturn transits. I mean, Saturn was square my moon. Mm-hmm. Both times that I was doing, like the first writing and then the big rewrite.
Yeah,
with the Saturn square moon transit.
There's moments when you're filled with self-doubt at that point in time because you're saying,
the whole time.
What am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? Am I crazy? Why did I sign myself up for this torture? But something about it, you have to do. And it's not easy as a Cancer. It's not easy being criticized. I understand that because you get very sensitive, and to have someone pick you apart is not easy. Especially when it comes to work.
My editor's a Cancer too, so I think it was hard for her. It was hard for her and it was hard for me.
Well, she probably felt sympathy for you. She felt bad for you. She felt bad that she had to come out with these sort of things. But
the job had to get done.
The job had to get done, and it has to be right. Otherwise, you can't really be published in that regard. You got to get it right, and that's part of it.
Yeah,
too.
you can't really have an ego, but you need enough ego to want to write a book and to believe that you can and believe you have something to say.
Yeah.
You need that amount, and I'm happy with the way it turned out. Actually, I mean, I couldn't have done it on my own because that would have been a different book.
That's a good thing.
So I'm happy and I'm grateful and I'm excited because I mean, Wiser has such an incredible history. I mean, there's probably not a publisher I would rather be with because it's like. It's Wiser. My good, I have so many Wiser books on my shelf.
I know. It's the one. If you're going to be one, if you're going to be on one, that's the one
amazing.
to be on. Absolutely right. I totally get that. But that's the other part. It sort of makes us. I think Saturn is also about diligence. It's about determination. It's about tenacity. All those heavy words.
Even when you feel self-doubt, even when you feel what's the point, even when you want to quit. I wanted to quit. I totally wanted to quit. Mm-hmm. But I didn't.
Yeah, I believe that.
That wasn't Neptune that finished a book. That was Saturn.
Yeah, it would have to be Saturn. We've run out of time, as I thought we would. We had a great time talking here. And we can continue this conversation again if you have another book that comes out or whatever. But my guest,
hope so, yeah.
My guest today has been Aliza Einhorn, and her book is called The Little Book of Saturn: Astrological Gifts, Challenges, and Returns. We all know them. Saturn is what's considered to be a malefic planet. Some think of it as being benefic because it does force us to get ourselves going. So it can be viewed both ways. And her website is Moon Pluto Astrology, one long word, moonplutoastrology.com. Again, Aliza Einhorn. Her book, The Little Book of Saturn, comes out tomorrow, and that's great to know that you've done that. See, now you've crossed that, and here comes the reward. All the hard work that you put in, the reward is now here, right?
Thank you.
See?
The reward was talking to you today. I appreciate
good.
it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
You.
Well, thanks, Aliza, for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, too.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.